It is 9:01. I'm going to call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Establish that we have a quorum present. 5 out of 7, we have a quorum. I'd like to call Reverend Bill Proctor to come up and lead us in the prayer. And then Mr. Urick is going to lead us in the pledge.
Right here. I didn't realize until I looked at the agenda for this morning that I actually know 2 of the members of the Planning Commission, so I can confirm that we definitely need to begin with prayer this morning. So let us join together in prayer. Lord, it's Monday morning, and many of us in this room have a lot of work before us as we begin a new week. We thank you for that and ask your guidance as we do our work. The Planning Commission also has a lot of work before it this morning. So I pray for them as they deliberate decisions that need to be made. I pray that you'll enable them to be flexible where flexibility is required and firm where firmness is required. And overall, I ask that you give them the wisdom to know the difference between. I pray for those who are appearing before the commission this day that you will give them patience and forbearance and understanding, and that all the business will be conducted fairly and openly. Lord, we thank you for your goodness to us, and so I make this prayer in your holy name. Amen. Thank you.
Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pledge allegiance to thee, Texas.
All right. First item is the consent agenda. The commission may request for a consent agenda item to be moved to the regular agenda for presentation and public comment. Otherwise, the consent agenda will be considered in one vote. Consideration of approving the May 21st, 2018 Planning Commission regular meeting notes. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. 5-0. Do I need to read the Stripes edition into the minutes on the consent agenda? No? Yes?
No, you don't have to read it.
No, we're good. Okay. So regular agenda, rezonings. City Council has final authority for approval of rezonings. Z 18-13, Hirschfeld Properties LP, public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a rezoning from general commercial, heavy commercial zoning and single-family residential zoning to the heavy commercial zoning district, being 2.053 acres located at 3014 Grape Creek Road. Mr. Fisher.
Morning, Planning Commissioners. Jeff Fisher, Senior Planner with the City of San Angelo. Our first case today is a rezoning, Z1813 Hirschfeld Properties LP. It's municipal address 3014 Grape Creek Road on 2.053 acres. The current zoning on approximately the west half of the property is CGCH, and the remainder on the east half is RS1. Applicant is proposing a rezoning to exclusively CH zone across the whole entire property. It's located at the southeast corner of Grape Creek Road and West 31st Street, SMD number 2, Tom Thompson's district in the Riverside neighborhood. So the current long-term plan, future land use is industrial, and that includes all of the property here, as you see. The current zoning, since at least the 1987 zoning maps, which was previously C2 and now CGCH, is the west half that you can see here. The east half has remained RS1. So the applicant, Hirschfeld Steel, has industrial storage on this property, predominantly steel pipes, nothing else at this time. Rezoning to a CH would allow the industrial storage. It would not allow manufacturing, it would not allow processing or any heavy industrial, but would allow the industrial storage as it is right now, as well as some other uses. This is looking north. There's existing homes as you go north on 31st Street. This is looking west. Hirschfeld owns predominantly most of this area as you go west and south of the subject property. As you go east and north, though, it's residential. So this is east, and this is south, looking at the home immediately to the west of the property. So as you can see, the zoning ordinance will require two things if this was approved to go to CH. One is a minimum 6-foot-high privacy fence. Hirschfeld has already done that years ago, so there's an existing 6-foot-high metal fence all around the property. The second provision that will apply is they'll have to keep a 10-foot setback from the east side yard, which abuts residential. There was a complaint that was filed to our Code Compliance Division from the neighbor immediately to the east, and part of that complaint was that the storage at the time had been moved right up to the property line. Hirschfeld has since moved that back prior to this meeting, all on the CGCH side until an outcome is determined. If they were approved, they would be able to move it back, but they'd have to keep a 10-foot separation. They can no longer butt up against the fence. So this is an example of the current storage facility. These are the large steel pipes. There's an entrance from the west of the property, and from the south there are currently no entrances from the north side of the property where the homes are. This is an example of, as you zoom back out, you'll see you've got Bryant, 29th Street, arterial roads, and then Grape Creek. Here's the property up here. So as you go north and east, it is residential, but as you go west and south, it's commercial. So this is one of those situations. It's kind of right in the middle. Staff is recommending approval to the CH zone based on the following. It is compatible with the current future land use comprehensive plan, which has been in place since 2003 for industrial, and of course the industrial designation does support industrial and heavy commercial storage. Secondly, it's consistent with the zoning ordinance. If it was rezoned to CH, there'd be ample room. If they ever did put in any parking, at this time it's all caliche and the steel piping. They've got the 6-foot-high privacy fence. They'll have to maintain a 10-foot side yard setback. Compatibility with surrounding area. It has remained non-residential on this property since 1996. We are aware, though, however, that didn't mean that they had the right necessarily to put it in the RS1. But with the zone change, the 10-foot setback required, and the privacy fence that's already there, we believe that that should increase its compatibility with the surrounding area. Change conditions, as mentioned, the comprehensive plan has been industrial since 2003. If it was to stay the same, it really wouldn't be developed residential. We don't anticipate that. Hirschfeld has owned the property for years, and the RS1, like I say, is within that privacy fence. So if it doesn't go to CH, it would probably have to go to something industrial, commercial down the road anyway. We don't anticipate any effects on the natural environment at this time, given that it's just storage and the entire property is a caliche surface. There's no plans to redevelop. If they did, they'd have to come in for a permit down the road and put, say, a little office building there. They'd have to have a grading and drainage reviewed at that time as part of permitting. Community need. The property is next to the existing Hirschfeld facility. It's existed in that configuration for at least 30 years or more. The company provides employment to local residents, so based on that, we believe that that test has been met. And finally, the development patterns. The properties were already platted. Lot configurations aren't subject to change. It's got frontage onto Grape Creek Road, a collector road, and it's close to other services and the existing Hirschfeld facility. Public notification was sent out. Out of the 50 notices received, we received 1 in favor as per the Green Star and 3 in opposition as per the Red Stars. Provided you with that correspondence. Staff recommendation is to approve a rezoning from the general commercial, heavy commercial CGCH zoning district and the single-family residential RS1 zoning district to the heavy commercial CH zoning district. This concludes staff's presentation. Any questions or comments?
Anyone have questions for the staff? So this has been a storage yard since 1996.
The best of our knowledge, the client is here to, the customer is here to answer any questions on that. To the best of our knowledge, the aerial photography does confirm non-residential storage since 96, but we don't have the date of the original inception of that.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for the staff?
No, I had the same question. The difference between how long has storage been going on in that area versus how long has the person next door, or a couple houses next door, been there? I'd just like to know a little bit of history of, I'm sure we'll find that out in just a second.
I think that the resident is here to answer that question as well.
Okay. I'd like to open it up for public comment, please. If you're coming up to speak, if you'd please state your name before you start, I would appreciate it.
I'm the guy who lives next door to Hirschfield Steel. And it has been since 1963 that I've resided
Sir,
there.
I'm sorry, can you speak into the mic?
Yes.
Thank you.
I've resided in my residence at 209 West 31st since 1963. I did 22 years in the Marine Corps, and I came back in 1997, and that's when that lot was discovered. The individual I would need to talk with to find exactly what transpired was my father, and he's deceased. So nobody I can ask now. It has been an issue since I've been retired and been there. I mean, he's got nice, pretty pictures everywhere. It's been cleaned up for the last 3 months, and that's the pictures he showed you. I've got pictures I can show you where it's actually a junkyard. There's been vehicles in there leaking oil everywhere. My biggest concern is they put that steel right next to my house. It gets popped by lightning. I lose everything in my house. I replace windows. You're more than welcome to come to my house when the next storm comes through, sit in my living room, and it's a real good experience. I've had issues with Hirschfield Steel. Right now, I currently have a 55-gallon drum of waste oil in my backyard that got rolled over the fence and leaked in my yard that I can't get rid of because nobody believes where it came from. I've had the windshield of my vehicles knocked out. I've had my dogs injured. I've had vermin and critters coming through that fence into my yard. It's a bad deal. 10 feet, I'm sorry. All I've ever asked for is please get the steel away from my house. They can put it towards the backyard, I don't care. Rezoning, no problem. Just get the steel away from my house. That's all I've ever asked. No, they put it right up next to my house. I've got an ice box on my back porch right now from the last storm. $1,000. Over 10 years, I've dumped over $30,000 in electronics. I've replaced scores of windows. I understand he's a business and he's out to make a buck, but not at my expense, guys. All I'm asking is get the steel away from my house. If my other neighbors were here, they've got other things to say, but they're not here. It's just me. I'm the one who's experiencing the most of it. I'm sorry, but I'm the one that's getting a lot of damage here. I'm retiring. I'm old. I'm not going to move. I mean, if he wants to come along and do his job, that's fine, just not at my expense.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I have a question for you. There are several remedies that you could,
Fixing too, sir.
what's that?
I'm considering it, sir, but I figured I would go through this first.
Okay.
Thank you. Any more public comment? Okay. We're going to close public comment. Anyone have any, anything they'd like to say about this case? Any more questions that you'd like to ask the staff?
So we don't have anybody from Hirschfeld to speak on Hirschfeld's behalf? Okay.
Good morning, folks. Jeremy Bartz, HR Director, Executive Safety Officer for Hirschfeld. I understand Mr. Bannert's concerns. Trust me, I've worked here for 11 years. In this time, of course, we try to be good neighbors. We do everything that we can to enhance the neighborhood. Certainly don't want to degrade our neighborhoods. We understand that people live close by. One thing that we've always concerned ourselves with is, of course, our noise. We understand that the noise is deafening. It's steel. Steel moves, it makes noise. We, in this particular area, will not operate under the noise ordinance hours. We will stop operation during that time because we understand, again, that could cause a disruption. In terms of the material setback, we would be more than willing to give the setback away from Mr. Bannert's home. We have no issues there whatsoever. We certainly will use this as a storage facility only. There will be no cutting, no welding, other than shipping and transportation, which would be done via forklift and truck. That's the only material movement you would have there. The other complaints in terms of oil being dumped over the fence or any of those other things, I cannot confirm that because I've not seen that personally. So I can't confirm those things. But as far as our commitment to the city, of course, as you all well know, we have just recently been acquired by a company out of Oklahoma City. And so our commitment, of course, is to stay here. We've been here for over 70 years, and we plan to stay here for at least that long. We don't intend to be bad neighbors. If it takes us augmenting our facility a little bit, we'll do that. We'll pull some material back as far away from his home as necessary. We certainly don't want to create any more issues for him. But at the same time, we also have, as you know, a business to run, and this material is quite large. So there are certain limitations that we have in terms of even 2.05 acres to store that material. Any questions that I can answer for you all?
Thank you, sir.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate your help.
Is the fence for this lot, does it run the entire boundary of the lot?
Yes, it does.
All four sides?
Yes, there's a couple openings for the entrances, one on the west.
3 sides?
That's right. One on the west and
Mine
one on
coming
the
out.
south.
Could you go back one slide? Right there. Is 209 West 31st Street your home? Okay. So this slide that we're looking at right here is your house next door to the storage lot? Okay. And do you mind coming back up here, please, sir? You said there's fencing only on 3 sides of the lot?
This side, the front, and down Grape Creek where there's a gate about halfway down, but the end towards Hirschfeld Steel is open. Now, there is a chain link fence in the middle of it, but it's open in the middle of that.
Okay. So the southern boundary of this lot is not fenced, is that?
The one towards Hirschfeld Steel. It's open.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay, so the zoning has a 10-foot setback requirement, is that correct?
That's correct, from the east
For
property
storage?
line.
Sorry?
Just from the east property line facing the gentleman's property, because it's zoned residential, not
Okay.
from the other 3 sides.
Okay. Are you satisfied with the 10-foot setback if they abide by those rules, sir? Okay. 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 All right, anyone else up here have questions or comments? We have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the zone change as presented.
We have a motion and a second to approve as presented. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, 5-0. Thank you, sir. All right. Get organized here, sorry. Okay, conditional uses. Planning Commission has final authority for approval. Appeals may be directed to the City Council. CU 18-11, Gutierrez. Public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a conditional use to allow for alcoholic beverage sales for on-premises consumption in the general commercial, heavy commercial zoning district, being 0.59 acres located at 3027 North Chadburn Street.
Good morning, Hillary Bucher, Senior Planner. This is the conditional use for alcoholic beverage sales for on-premise consumption. It's 0.59 acres, the southwest corner of East 31st Street and North Chadburn, SMD number 2, Tom Thompson in the Riverside neighborhood. So you can see quite a bit of mix of uses around here just from this aerial. There's some commercial, this being North Chadburn, and then residential directly behind it. The future land use of this property is commercial, and the current zoning is CGCH. So these are some photos of the site existing. This was previously used as a bar. It has been something intermittently, and now they're trying to go back with kind of a bar setting, a club or a bar. So this is looking south down North Chadburn Street. You can see the majority of the lot is paved. They're doing some cleaning and some, painting on the existing building. There's a little bit of deterioration in the parking lot, but overall, fairly good surface for the extent. This is looking north down Chadburn. We wanted to point out the existing sign that's there seems to be non-conforming, and that is reflective in one of the conditions. Again, the south side of the parking lot, fairly good overall with some minor deterioration. So this is looking east across Chadburn Street to some of the commercial businesses, and then this back area right here is toward the residential. So staff is recommending approval, and our rationale is this was previously used as a bar, so the surrounding, and is surrounded by commercial properties, with some of them having alcoholic sales, so we believe the impacts will be minimized. It's consistent with the zoning ordinance. It is allowed in CGCH with the conditional use. And the surrounding area, North Chadburn Street, is predominantly a commercial area, so this should fit in with that development pattern. We do not anticipate any negative effects on the environment and the community need. We see similar uses that have been established for many years in that area, so they continue to operate. And the development pattern, again, is surrounded by mostly commercial on Chadburn. We mailed out 17 notices and received 1 in favor. So staff is recommending approval of a conditional use to allow for alcoholic beverage sales for on-premise consumption in the general commercial, heavy commercial zoning district, subject to 3 conditions of approval. Number 1, the applicant shall work with the Permits and Inspections Division to ensure the building meets the occupancy requirements for a bar. The applicant must restore or remove the existing sign. Any alteration or relocation of the sign, except for routine maintenance or repair and or replacement of sign faces, will require a building permit, which shall require compliance with today's city codes. So that's why I pointed that sign out. If they do anything other than just paint it, clean it up, and put a new face in it, it will be required to be in compliance with today's ordinances. And finally, the applicant shall meet all current parking associated with the conditional use. We are assuming this would be just painting. Like I said, most of the surfacing is good. So once the occupancy is fully determined, they will have to provide us the number of seats for the bar, which will determine the number of parking spaces. So we'll make sure they're compliant with today's ordinance once we get a little bit further into the process. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay. No questions. Thank you, Hillary.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to open this up for public comment. Would like to speak on this case? Okay, we're going to close public comment. Any discussions among us, or do we have a motion?
I'll
To approve as presented.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve as presented by the staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. 5-0. All right, CU 18-13, Lyra. Public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a conditional use to allow for retail sales and service in the office commercial zoning district being .15 acres located at 3411 South Johnson Street. Ms. Bucher.
Okay, Hillary Bucher again. This is a conditional use for retail sales and service. It's .15 acres, approximately 420 feet north of the intersection of South Johnson and Knickerbocker Road, SMD number 5, Lane Carter, in the ASU College Hills neighborhood. The future land use of this area is neighborhood center, and the current zoning is office commercial, which would not allow for the retail sales and service aspect. So these are some photos of the site. This is looking down the existing alley. This is an open, undeveloped parcel, and the building would actually be this back one. So there is actually a south entrance. Let me go back one slide. So the entrance to the area is actually here. This is looking down the alley. So this is actually the entrance to the shopping area or the office area. This is looking from the entrance toward the building. So you can see it's not too far off, but if you've driven by this area, you've probably seen this little development before. And then again, they have parking right in front and to the side of their building. So there's additional parking over here. So staff is recommending approval of this conditional use. They're actually proposing a hair salon. So a hair salon should not increase the traffic or change the building drastically from what it was a real estate office. Retail sales and service is allowed in the CO zoning district with a conditional use. And the intersection of South Johnson and Knickerbocker is predominantly commercially zoned and developed. We don't anticipate any negative effects on the natural environment. And similar uses have been established in this area for many years. The subject property is zoned office commercial, but it's surrounded by several different zoning districts compatible with the proposed use. So we mailed out, again, 17 notifications, receiving 2 in favor and 0 in opposition. And staff is recommending approval of a conditional use to allow for retail sales and service in the office commercial zoning district, subject to 3 conditions of approval. Again, they shall work with the Permits and Inspections Division to ensure the occupancy requirements are met for a hair salon. An access easement must be recorded with Tom Green County, giving the applicant permanent access to South Johnson Street. Currently, the owner of the property was looking to see if there was one. She believes that sometime there was, but we just want to ensure that if this property is developed as a hair salon, that they will always have access. Let me go back real quick to describe this. And not just through the alley. So currently, it's kind of a landlocked piece right here, the main access being here. So if the other neighbors were to fence it off, they would only have access through the alley. So that's what we are requiring, some sort of agreement filed with the county to ensure that they have access. And finally, they're going to meet all the parking requirements associated with the conditional use. Again, we'll have to look at it as they go through the building permit process phase, but it could just include striping because the area is relatively well paved. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions for Hillary? No? All right.
Thank you.
I'm gonna open it up for public comment. Anyone wish to speak on this case, please come forward. I'm going to close public comment. Any?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
please.
Oh, Diane, come on.
And this easement is in our deed of trust.
Okay, perfect.
You want a copy
Yes,
of
ma'am,
it?
that'd be great.
Okay. So I think we already have what we need.
Perfect.
So,
Thank
okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any questions or comments? We have a motion.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve as presented by the staff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? 0, 5-0.
Thank you.
Okay, CU 18-14, Crosspoint Fellowship Church of San Angelo, Inc. Public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a conditional use to allow for a religious institution in the single-family residential zoning district, being 1.407 acres located at 4210 Coliseum Drive and on 3 unaddressed tracts at the southwest and southeast corners of Coliseum Drive and 43rd Street. Mr. Fisher.
Morning again, Planning Commissioners. Jeff Fisher, Senior Planner. Conditional use 1814, Crosspoint Fellowship Church. This is a conditional use to allow the existing church, as many of you know, before 2000, the RS1 zoning district allowed churches and schools by right. And then after 2000, they were only allowed to expand or add another property by conditional use. So the existing church, which has existed since at least the 1990s, is on this L-shaped property here. They want to expand down the road across the street and purchase this property. So this conditional use would allow them to do that. It's 1.407 acres in total at the southwest and the southeast corners of Coliseum Drive and 43rd Street in San Angelo. SMD number 2, Tom Thompson's district in the Lakeview neighborhood. So the long-term plan, the future land use is neighborhood, and the zoning is single-family residential, RS1. As you go to the north, you've got the Foster Communications Coliseum, and as you go further east, you've got a couple schools, including Lakeview High School. So this is looking north at the Coliseum, this is going east. This is south, and this is southeast at the existing church. You can see they've paved their parking lot already. There's about 25 parking spaces at the front of the property. This is looking west at the vacant property, and as that upside down L shape you saw actually goes down to the other street, 30th, and there's a fence that's already there along the east and the south end. The main building is the church facility, as I understand it, and then going down the L-shaped property is the fellowship hall on the existing property. So the site plan pretty much lays it out. Staff's rationale is to approve the conditional use request based on the following. We believe there will be minimal impacts based on the current site configuration and some of the conditions of approval we're proposing. So on the vacant site of the future expansion, zoning ordinance will require anyway a 6-foot-high privacy fence along the west and south property lines abutting residential, so as they go to expand. The other thing that we're adding is at the time of expansion, which again, they have no plans, I understand, at the current time, planning director will need to approve a site plan. The site plan could include conditions such as sidewalks, crosswalks, fencing, and any future parking areas. This will apply even if they don't put a building on the property, even if it's just a parking lot. We'll want to make sure that there's connectivity between the two sites. The current zoning, RS1, both lots will comply with the lot area, lot frontage, and lot depth. As mentioned, the existing parking has 25 spaces. The current church requires 13 under the zoning ordinance based on the calculations for a religious institution, so they're well above that. Compatible with surrounding area, as mentioned, you've got Lakeview High School, the Coliseum, so there are other institutional uses close by to the church. No anticipated effects on the natural environment at this time, given that the existing parking area has already been able to go in again for a new, at the site plan stage of any future development. Review of grading and drainage will be done through the permitting process. Just a quick note on the vacant property. They will not have to plat that. They did give us a deed record back in 1928. The subdivision ordinance requires, as long as that surveyed land was done in the current configuration prior to 1940, they will not have to, 1950, I believe, they won't have to plat. So they'll just need the site plan, though, and we'll be able to look at some of those buildings and setbacks at that time. And finally, development patterns. Property is adjacent to collector streets to accommodate traffic, and as mentioned, no new platting is required. 17 notices were mailed out. There were 2 in favor I've provided to you and none in opposition. Staff recommendation is to approve a conditional use to allow for a religious institution in the single-family residential RS1 zoning district, subject to the 4 conditions of approval in the staff report. If you'd like, I can read those into the record briefly.
That'd be fine. Please
Okay.
go through them.
Okay. So number 1, the applicant shall submit a site plan for review and approval for the vacant 0.629 acre property at the time of any construction, including a parking lot. So that'll be, if that's the vacant property. 2, the applicant shall install a minimum 6-foot-high opaque privacy fence along the west and south property lines of that property, tapering to 4 feet within the 25-foot front yard setbacks prior to any construction, including a parking lot on that property. 3, if the vacant property to the east, this is the property immediately east of the church, facing East 43rd, develops residentially, the applicant shall extend the existing 6-foot-high privacy fence along the east property line of 4210 Coliseum Drive northward to the end of Lot 2, tapering to 4 feet within the 25-foot front yard setback. So where their parking lot is existing of the church, there is another vacant lot they don't own to the east. If they were to ever put a building on that property, they just have to extend that existing privacy fence northward about 65 feet. And 4, the applicant shall obtain a building permit from the Permits and Inspections Division for any new buildings or structures on the property. This concludes staff's presentation.
Okay. Anyone have questions for the staff?
I have a question. On number 2, with the conditions of approval, you use the term opaque. 6-foot-high opaque. Doesn't opaque mean translucent, or is that just a solid fence?
Solid fence. Yep.
I thought it meant that it was,
You could see through it.
you could see some.
Okay. Is there anyone with the church that's here this morning that would like to speak, or?
Pastor Joel Oliver with Cross Point Fellowship Church. I just want to thank you for your time in approving this matter.
Okay.
That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, we're going to open it up for public comment. Anyone wish to speak in favor or opposition on this case? All right, we're going to close public comment. Any discussion amongst us, or do we have a motion?
I make the motion
We have a motion to approve
to approve as proposed.
as presented by the staff, and a second. So all in favor, say aye. 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 All opposed? None. 5-0. All right. Text amendment. City Council has final authority for approval of text amendments. Public hearing and consideration of text amendment to Chapter 12, Exhibit C, Land Development and Subdivision Ordinance, Chapter 1, General Provisions requiring platting for the combining of land, exempting adjacent single-family lots under common ownership from replatting, revising the floor area exception for properties with existing buildings. Chapter 3, Definitions, removing redundant language from the definition of subdivision. Chapter 5, Procedural requirements for subdivisions, modifying expiration dates for plats. Chapter 6, Guarantee of performance, creating a deferral of obligation option and extension of performance guarantees with the developer's agreement. And Chapter 9, subdivision design policies, allowing the deferral of drainage studies and authorizing the city engineer as their approval authority. Mr. James.
Thank you. John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This is a number of different both cleanup items and some substantive changes to the ordinance, and so I'm going to go through briefly each one, but feel free to stop me and ask questions. In Chapter 1, we're looking at better defining when a subdivision plat is required. Currently, the ordinance only speaks of dividing lots. However, historically, in many cases, when you're taking two lots and combining them into one new lot, then a plat is done to affect that. But the ordinance doesn't specifically reference combining lots, and so this would clean that up in terms of the definition of when a plat would be required.
What happens right now if that is the case where, let's say, someone bought a lot next to him and was, basically going to consolidate and expand the existing house into or over into that lot? What's required and how is that enforced?
Well, and that actually brings us to this second bullet here. Currently, we have a practice for a single-family home, if you own the two lots and you want to build a house over both lots, over the lot line, you don't have to replat, although the ordinance doesn't actually say that. So another thing that we propose here is creating that specific exemption for residential lots. If you buy the lot, two lots adjacent to each other and want to build a house and treat both lots as if it's one big lot, this would allow you to do that. On the other hand, for a commercial property, for example, if you buy multiple lots to create a shopping center, for example, this would require that to be replatted into one large lot rather than keeping multiple individual lots. There's also a plat exception for if you're expanding an existing business or house over a certain amount. Right now, if you're expanding by more than 50%, you would have to plat the property if it's not already platted. None of this applies to any lot that's already been legally platted in the past and will continue in the same configuration. These would only apply to lots that either predated the subdivision ordinance and so for whatever reason didn't plat in the past. This is when that plat would be triggered. We're proposing to reduce that to 25% expansion would trigger a plat, and also cap it at 5,000 square feet. So for example, under our current ordinance, say 100,000 square foot Walmart, they could add 49,000 square feet to their building and it wouldn't trigger a plat of the property. We think that there should be some sort of cap that super large buildings shouldn't be able to add that much on without having to plat, again, if they hadn't already platted in the past. Most new developments have to plat anyway, and so this would only apply to some of the historic developments that never got platted initially. We cleaned up our definition of subdivision. Under the definition of subdivision in our current ordinance, it lists all of the exceptions to subdivision, but those exceptions are also listed in the ordinance. And so we just took them out of the definition. We want to keep the definition as purely a definition of what is a subdivision and leave the other part of the ordinance to say when the exceptions are. Really two reasons to do that. We don't like to include regulations within the definitions. It should really be defining terms. Secondly, if we have exceptions in two different places in the ordinance, there's more of a chance as we amend ordinances over the years for someone to amend one section and forget to amend the other, and then you have conflicting terms. So again, it's not a substantive change. It's just removing some things from the definition of subdivision that are already stated elsewhere in the ordinance. In Chapter 5, we look at procedural requirements. We're proposing to change the expiration on plats. For administrative plats, those are the ones that don't come to you that can be approved by staff. Currently, they expire in 6 months. We've found that sometimes that's problematic for a developer to get all of the things they need to get done within 6 months. So we're proposing to increase that to 12 months. Final plats and replats right now, they expire after 18 months, but there's a possibility for another 18-month extension. We think it's simpler just to say 3 years total without having to do 18 months and then ask for an extension to get another 18 months. Preliminary plats currently don't have any expiration. As part of the research for this, we looked at many of our peer cities, and most of them, in fact all of them, have expirations on preliminary plats, and The most common is 2 years. There are some with 3 years, but there aren't any. None of the peer cities that we looked at have expirations that are longer than 3 years. And so you'll note in your document that we provided you, we initially took this to the Development Task Force, suggesting 3 years as the proposal. They thought that was maybe a little short, and so what we're bringing to you is a 5-year expiration. We're really less concerned about the amount of time than the fact of getting an expiration on the books, and that's partly to comply with state law and to avoid a situation where maybe a preliminary plat that was approved 50 years ago, technically we don't have any expiration of that. So even though development patterns in an area may have changed, our subdivision rules may have changed, we would be obligated to approve a plat subject to that preliminary plat that was done decades ago. And so we think it's important, like all of our peer cities, to set some expiration on that. Initially, when we took this to the Development Task Force, again, we looked at 3 years, and we proposed a possible extension, a discretionary, basically, extension by the planning director for progress made on the preliminary, on final plats for the preliminary plat. But what we decided to do was, rather than make it sort of similar to the one we just talked about, instead of 3 years and then a 2-year extension, let's just make it 5 years. And so that's how we came up with the 5 years. And now I know we can talk about this later. There may be some concerns about this particular item from some of the development community, and so we can talk about that when we get to that point. But
I do have one quick question
Sure.
on this. So let's say someone comes in and they have a preliminary plat for 50 lots, 50 residential lots, and over the course of the 5-year period, 20 lots are developed. Does the clock reset when they
it does.
when they come in for a final plat on one of those lots?
Yes. So if you get a preliminary plat approved today, and in
It's
a
5
year
years of
you bring in
inactivity.
5 years, or you bring in 5 lots for a plat, your 5 years gets extended again from that point. So each time you bring in a final plat, it keeps extending out 5 years.
It's 5 years of inactivity.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Can you talk about the Development Task Force a little bit and maybe what the procedure was to have them have an opportunity to make comments and kind of look at what was being proposed as?
Yes, every other month, we have a meeting of what we call the Development Task Force, and the invitations for that are sent out to basically everybody who's involved in the development process, and anybody can get on that list. If they're not on the list today, we can add them to that email list, letting them know of what's on the upcoming meeting. But it's typically attended by developers, home builders, local engineers, et cetera, those type of folks. And the idea is to give them kind of a preview of things that we're looking at and let them weigh in on things like this subdivision ordinance amendment. In fact, as I've already mentioned, some of the concerns we heard from them at that meeting we've addressed by amending our recommendation for the ordinance. But again, it's an opportunity for us to lay out some things to them before it comes to you all in City Council. We also have an open-ended time for them to bring up concerns that maybe aren't something that's on the agenda. Chapter 6 is where we talk about guarantees of performance. Right now, if you want to plat a piece of property and file that plat, you either have to construct all of the roads, sewer, water lines, all of that before you can file the final plat, or you can put up a performance guarantee, which can be a bond, a letter of credit, or actually cash. As you know, we've talked about in the last few meetings allowing plats to move forward, but deferring improvements. Like, in fact, we had one today where some of the infrastructure improvements that would be required per the plat could be delayed until the property actually develops. I'll tell you, we're a little uncomfortable doing that because the ordinance doesn't give us that authority. Right now, it says if you want to wait and not put in roads, sidewalks, sewer, water lines, if you don't want to do that right now at the plat, you have to give us a bond, letter of credit, or cash. there's really no other option. So what this ordinance amendment would do would create what we call a deferral of obligation. Basically, the developer could enter a development agreement with the city that would say, either at some point in time or when the property develops, I'll build the roads or put in the sidewalk or whatever the case may be. And the reason this is necessary is state law gives cities the authority to require infrastructure improvements when a plat is filed. And so in order to not require it at the plat but delay it until some future time, we have to have that authorization in our ordinance to do that. Again, currently those performance guarantees, like if you give a letter of credit saying, I'll build the road, if you don't build the road within 3 years, the city will cash that letter of credit and build the road ourselves, and we use that money to do it. And right now, there's no opportunity to extend that beyond 3 years. This developer's agreement and deferral would allow that to extend past 3 years. So for example, if you plat the property today and enter the development agreement, if the property doesn't develop for 5 years, then it would be 5 years down the road that those obligations would kick in. I should add here that the development agreement and deferral is written as an option for the city to allow or not allow. It's not a choice the developer has. So there are some circumstances where we may not recommend a deferral. Normally, the situations where we would recommend it is where there is a subsequent development phase that would happen, like a building permit or a site plan, and we would defer it to that particular point. One of the concerns with this is the reason we ask, and most cities ask for cash or a bond, is if a developer goes out of business and doesn't build what they said they would build, what recourse do we have? Well, if we've got a bond, we can call in that money and actually build it ourselves. If it's just a signed agreement that says, oh yeah, I'll do it sometime in the future, that's not worth a whole lot. But in a case where there's future development activity, it's that development activity that we can hold them accountable for. And this is this is in the subdivision design chapter where we talk about drainage studies. And this has come up recently as well on that project out on just off the loop behind Lowe's, where we wanted to be able to defer the drainage study. The idea was, well, we're just platting property, we're drawing boundary lines. We don't know exactly what's going to go on the property, so how do we do an adequate drainage study? This gives us that same authority to say the drainage study doesn't have to be done at the plat, but can be deferred until later in the process when the development is actually occurring. That's kind of a brief summary. I know that's a lot of information quickly, but we are recommending approval of all those changes. I won't read through each of these, but this is the list basically that I just went through in the charts of each amendment to each chapter. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do you mind going back a few slides?
Sure.
Stop, right there. The deferral of obligation. So someone comes in and they've got a preliminary plat that you approve, and they enter into a deferral of obligation agreement. What measures does the city staff have in place to ensure that that agreement is being reviewed if it's 4 or 5 years down the road before development occurs? The concern I'd have with an agreement like that is that it somehow gets overlooked, and maybe the city doesn't have an opportunity to enforce measures that they would have on the front end if they were addressed when the case came through.
Well, that's a legitimate concern. I can tell you what, in other cities where I've been where this is an option, we actually mapped it in our GIS system so that when a development comes in and we're checking those kinds of things,
yes,
it's there on the map. Oh, this is a location that has a development agreement. We will have to put in some form of check in place to be able to do that down the road. But some of this will it sort of will fix itself. So, for example, if I plat today and say I don't want to build the road yet, or I don't want to put in the water line yet, I want to wait till my development happens. Well, when development happens, they're going to need that water line. So very few developments would come in and say, well, I'm not going to put in a water line. Right. And so I think the cases would be rare that would get missed. But it's definitely a concern that we need to address internally.
You don't require a drainage study for a building permit, do you? That's on the plat side.
It depends. If a site plan is triggered, then the drainage is something that's looked at the site plan. So in some ways like that, sidewalks is another example.
Yeah.
We look at sidewalks both at the platting stage and at the site plan stage. And in fact, water, roads, sewer, all of that's looked at as well. And so I don't have a concern that it would be flagged if one of those elements is missing when we get to the development phase. The only issue is what teeth do we have to say they have to upgrade a water line, for example.
Okay.
Other questions?
You guys have questions? All right. I'm assuming we can open this up for public comment. So I'd like to do that. We're going to open it up for public comment. If there's anyone that would like to speak on the changes that are being proposed by the staff, please come forward, state your name to begin with.
Good morning. I'm Steve Eustace. I'm in the commercial real estate business and do some commercial development. I'm the first one to speak because hopefully mine will be really short and we'll postpone discussion because we would like an opportunity to be able to review this, the development community would. I know it was discussed at a development meeting, but my understanding, I wasn't there, but my associate Brandon was there, and he told me there were changes coming, but we were going to get, a draft of what was being said. I didn't know about this until last night. I've just started reading it this morning. So we would like to ask you guys to just postpone this until we have a chance to review it and see what kind of impact it would have on us and ask questions. And so that's my comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eustace. Anyone else like to speak?
Good morning, Russell with SKG Engineering. I have two presentations prepared. One is from the business side, because we do the majority of the plats in the city. Is great. We're going to be busy. We need to ramp up for this. But on the other hand, is maybe we need to step back and as Steve alluded to, there's a whole lot of issues, items that we'd like to sit down with staff and talk through. There's even some more text changes that we would like, that grammatical, if you will, even within what they're proposing, that would make this read a whole lot better, that we would appreciate the opportunity truly to sit down and talk about it. And as Mr. Eustace alluded to at that task force meeting, we discussed some stuff at this high level, but this task force meeting is really not conducive to a sit down and let's talk through the meat of this thing discussion. It's kind of a presentation by staff. Here's what we've got coming down the pipe. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're proposing. You got some comments or questions, and there's a little bit of back and forth on that, but we did bring up some stuff on the time, and there's even a state law that the city may or may not be aware of that talks about specifically preliminary plats and their expiration and all of this activity. So they probably want to look at that very specific code and make sure they're in conformance, because it says a city shall not make. And so we would like, there again, the opportunity. If you want to make a motion to approve it, we'll do it, but there's a whole lot of comments we want to go, and if it's going to go to city council, and you guys move it forward, we'll take it to the next level with city council. So if you want me to get into the changes, I'll just start with page 1, or if you're inclined to maybe.
I agree with both of the comments that you guys have made about there are a lot of things that are proposed changes in this that are difficult to absorb on such a short time frame. So I personally don't object to tabling this and having some further discussion over it before we approve it. But I do think that the input and involvement of people like you, Mr. Gully, is very important. And so I would strongly recommend that you guys sit down with the city staff and voice your concerns if there are some for the proposed changes, and certainly come back if we're considering postponing this. I would, before we approve it, if you have objections to things, I'd like it, I mean that's what this forum's about, is allowing the public to come up and speak in favor or more importantly against if there's something that we're looking to approve. So,
you know, and we can accomplish it one of two ways. One, we sit down in a meeting with staff and we talk through it, or you guys send us a Word document of it, let us go and track changes and mark through it and send it back to you. You absorb it a little bit, and then we have the meeting. So we're open. We want to meet. If it's several meetings, we want to be able to work through it and talk through it. So we're ready and willing.
Let me just add, we're always willing to do that.
Yes.
I guess my concern with this at this point is that's kind of the point of the Development Task Force. We brought this twice to them. We brought it in March with kind of an overview, and again, they didn't see actual ordinance language then, but we outlined everything that we proposed changing in March.
yes.
Sought feedback from them at that point. 2 months later, in May, we had another Development Task Force meeting where we provided them a copy of the actual ordinance changes that you have, with some exceptions, in May, so a month ago. They know that our offices are open. They could have asked for that meeting that they're asking for today weeks ago. We would have been happy to do that. We're still happy to do that. It's a little frustrating, though, for them to bring that up at this point where we had an opportunity. As I mentioned, concerns were raised at that Development Task Force meeting in May. We actually made the changes that we heard at that meeting, made those changes and brought them to you. I guess that's really where I'm at. We don't have any problem with this. A number of these changes actually are meant to help the development community. If there are specific concerns, I might suggest we look at just those sections and move the rest of them on. But it's in your court, obviously. But again, some of these things, just like today, we felt somewhat uncomfortable asking you to approve a plat with a deferral without the authority in our ordinance to do that. This gives us that authority. And so, again, many of the things that we've proposed here will help out some of the concerns that we've heard from the development community. In other words, these aren't, from their perspective, these aren't all more restrictive. Many of the things that are changing are less restrictive, and I would hate for those to get mixed up and delayed indefinitely by this getting tabled and slowed down in the process.
Okay. Anyone have any comments or input up here?
The deferral, we're fine with the deferral. If that's one of the important things we want to move forward, let's move that forward. I think that the preliminary plat timeframe really is a real big concern, and then this notion of combining lots to be able to get a building permit. This is typically you look through it as the division of land for the sale, not necessarily the combining of lots for a building permit. So we'd like to talk through staff of what they're thinking about and how that could impact. There's a lot of lots and tracts in town where, Mr. Stribling, your house is a tract plus part of a neighboring tract, and that's still okay, but if you had a tract in some 50-foot lots and you wanted to do and build on more than 2 lots, and you're going through the subdivision process, and if you're commercial, it doesn't matter, you're going through it. So we really like to get into the meat of the discussion with staff. But the deferral, we believe that's a great deal, and we're supportive of that.
Okay. Have any more public comment?
Marky Templin, morning. Going back to the March meeting on the task force on March 21st, which was Wednesday, the day after the Planning Commission, we were told that the Planning Commission had received these items. So we were getting it after the fact. And then actually in the May meeting, we received and went over some of it in detail, about 8 or 9 pages. And then the one today is like 14 plus pages. And just some of the words, when they're scratched out, changes the whole meaning of the sentence. You know, so when it says the Director of Public Works, and then that is changed to the word study, it just put it on the subdivider instead of the Public Works. And so there's a whole lot of words in here that are scratched out and changes in black and red that to me is just not a proved document to go forward with, that we need to revise it and postpone this and go through it word by word to make sure it is what it is, so we're not doing this again.
Sir.
And like Russell said, there are some state statutes, I believe it's 2245-005 on dormant projects. So I think they need to be sure and review that to make sure that we're not doing something that we shouldn't be doing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys. There's a lot in here. Y'all want to discuss this now? Do y'all want to think about it for a little bit? Where do y'all stand?
I think at least it should be tabled.
Okay.
I don't see what tabling it is going to do. I think that I don't get where there's not been enough time for everybody to look at this, and if I'm missing something, let me know. But there has been plenty of time that has gone by, and how many meetings of the task force? 2 meetings of the task force, and that's not enough to have an in-depth discussion on what's coming down the pipeline. I don't understand. I think we're trying to kick this thing down the road. I don't agree with it, so I'm not going to vote to table it.
Okay. I think there's a lot of meat in these proposed changes, and this is the first time that I've really had a chance to look at it. Personally, I would like an opportunity to think about it a little bit more. There's a lot of changes that are proposed, and I understand the staff's frustration that they've gone a couple of months, but in all fairness, this is the first that I've seen a lot of this stuff. So I don't. It's not that I'm opposed to a lot of the changes. I just think that it bears careful consideration before we adopt it into our city ordinance. So.
How are we going to get it off center?
Well,
I mean,
if we table it,
we can keep going on, and we can keep going on. And I'm just saying, you know.
No, I
the
understand
task
what you're
force
saying.
Needs to do something, or you know what I'm saying. Just has to get off center.
I think if it's tabled, it comes back up in the next meeting for discussion and consideration for final approval. And in that course of a month, with folks like Mr. Gully and Mr. Eustace that have voiced concerns, have an opportunity to go speak with the staff and look at the changes that have been proposed in more detail, and come back to us with their comments, either approve or not. And it gives us a chance to kind of look at it as well. Like I said, this is the first time I've seen a lot of these changes, and there's a lot in here. So I guess if we're gonna table it, let's make a motion maybe to. Do we have a motion to table it, or if we're gonna discuss it further, let's.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'd move to table the vote on the proposed text amendments and allow more time for discussion between the city staff and the development community.
To the next meeting?
And I'd also add that this needs to be brought up for consideration at the next meeting.
Okay. So we have a motion to table until the next Planning Commission meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to table the text amendment changes until the next meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. So 4-1 to table it. All right, thank you. Lost my agenda. John, did you cover all of the text amendment changes, or was that just A?
That was just
Okay. Okay, B, public hearing and consideration of a text amendment to Chapter 12, Exhibit C, Land Development and Subdivision Ordinance, Chapter 3, Definitions, changing the definitions of lot, tract, and parcel for their intended purpose, and Chapter 4, Classification of Subdivisions, revising where lot, tract, and parcel are used to be consistent with their new definitions. Mr. James. It's all the same.
This is really just a cleanup. Right now, our ordinance basically uses the words lot, tract, and parcel interchangeably. And in the real estate parcel subdivision world, each of those terms really does mean something different, and most cities define those terms individually to mean different things. And so, for example, the word lot means a piece of property created by a subdivision. So if it's been subdivided legally through the subdivision process, that creates a lot. A tract is an unsubdivided piece of property or unplatted piece of property. And then parcel is a more generic term that can be used for a lot or a tract. And so what we've done here is basically clean up our ordinance to define those terms as I just described, lot, tract, and parcel, and then go through the ordinance to see each case where one of those words was used, what was the intent? Was the ordinance talking about lots that mean platted lots created under the ordinance, or was it talking about tracts that had not yet been subdivided? And so again, we don't think this results in any substantive changes. It's just cleaning up the language to clarify those terms.
Okay.
I'm not going to go through each of these. This is kind of what I just said. But again, we have the definitions of each of those, and I can go back to that slide if you need to, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions for the staff and Mr. James? All right. We're going to open it up for public comment. Anyone wish to speak in favor or opposition of the proposed changes to this terminology in our ordinances? Okay, we're going to close Mr. Eustace, if you please state your name.
Steve Eustace, and I guess I thought we were going to table all of this, but, and maybe it may be fine, I don't know. I mean, you read a contract written by an attorney, they may use the word tract, they may use the word parcel. Does that necessarily mean they got to do exactly what the rules of the city say in order in a contract? Does it mean something different?
No,
I mean,
this would only apply to our ordinance, but again, this has created some confusion in the ordinance where
Terms are used
interchangeably, but in some cases, the term lot is clearly used to mean a lot that has been created through the subdivision process.
I think we all agree a lot's a platted lot, but a parcel and a tract, I mean, I see them used interchangeably in legal documents all the time. So, I don't know. I don't know that I have a huge heartburn. I'm just not sure why we need to do this. When you give a comment back to somebody and you use the word tract or you use the word parcel, we all think we know what that means. They mean the same things to most people. They're not going to go, I better go look and see what the city of San Angelo's definition of the word tract and parcel. So what I mean, I'm just not sure why we need to do this.
The only reason why we're putting it in there is just to avoid that confusion, so that when we use the words, we actually have a definition for them. It doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. That's the only reason we're putting in there, to avoid confusion.
I just don't think anybody's gonna go look up the word. Some words, we gotta go to the definitions in a legal document. These two words, we would never go look up the definition because we think we know what it means. Maybe we don't, and maybe this is the right way to go, but I just think it's gonna cause more confusion.
And this, Russell with SKG, this may help Steve maybe confuse myself even more, but when you read the definition of a tract, it says an unplatted parcel of land, and then the definition of a parcel is a general term used for land. So a parcel is a tract, but a tract may not necessarily be a parcel?
Correct.
Okay.
Parcel could be a plot as well, or a lot.
So these terms you don't refer back to the survey or the legal description?
Yeah. I may suggest that we just table this one as well and bring it back in case
Okay.
there are concerns. I think that's fine.
Yeah, these have not been reviewed by legal.
Okay.
None of this has. But my understanding is that a parcel would be the most general term.
Right.
So if you had a meets and bounds description, you would take that meets and bounds as a tract out of the parcel.
I understand.
Okay.
Okay. We have a motion.
Make the motion that be tabled till the next meeting.
We have a motion and a second to table the proposed changes to the text amendment until the next meeting. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, 4-1.
It's just not that hard.
I understand.
All right. The lone wolf.
There's nothing wrong with being a lone wolf.
It's not.
So you gotta run. Okay, last item, C, public hearing and consideration of a text amendment to section 12.04.017 River Corridor Area of the City Code of Ordinances, replacing the River Corridor Sign Review Area with the new River Corridor District, Downtown District, and Cultural District overlays, removal of section 12.04.018, Fort Concho Historic District. Ms. Radio.
Okay, good morning. I am presenting a text amendment to the Code of Ordinances, Article 12. This is in response to last month's commission agenda where we talked about the River Corridor District and changing the name and all that. And so this is just updating one other chapter to reflect those changes that were brought before you. So first off, and what I gave you, the title, and this is referring solely to signs, to signage within the River Corridor District. Previously, it was called the River Corridor Area. We are updating that to the 3 new districts: River Corridor District, Downtown District, and Cultural District overlays. Previously, the Design Historic Review Commission was actually called the River Corridor Commission. We no longer refer to it by that title, so we are updating the name to reflect its current name. And the last change under 12.4.17 was that you guys had removed the 150-foot sign boundary, and so we are reflecting that in the ordinance as well. The sign regulations will only be for those districts and will not extend an additional 150 feet as it previously did.
Okay.
And then the other change for 12.4.018, and that is for the Fort Concho Historic District. That is word for word, basically redundant for what's in the previous chapter. And since the Fort Concho Historic District is now incorporated into the Cultural District overlay, we have removed it because it will be covered in the previous section entirely. However, because the Fort Concho Historic District is itself part of the historic overlay, changes will still require a certificate of appropriateness that they do now. That is all I have Do you have any questions for me? Oh, and we're recommending approval.
Okay. Guys have any questions for the staff as it relates to the proposed changes in the river corridor and text amendment changes to our ordinances here? No questions? Okay. We're going to open it up to the public. Does anyone wish to speak in favor or against or in general as it relates to the river corridor proposed changes? Okay. We're going to close the public comment. Anyone else up here have questions, or would anyone like to make a motion on this matter?
I make the motion to approve the text amendments to the sign ordinance for the river corridor.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve as presented by the staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 0.
Thank you, gentlemen.
5-0. Okay. Director's report.
All I had is there is an upcoming training, if anybody is interested. It is in Amarillo, and it's about a 2-hour training, so that may play into your decision, but it is about subdivisions. Our regional section it has put together a panel discussion on subdivision process, subdivision ordinances, et cetera. We'll have a planning director there, a planning consultant, a surveyor, developer, and an attorney, all to kind of talk about and answer any questions folks have about subdivisions. So we may have staff going to that, and we'll bring back information. But if any of you are interested in going, the city will, it's only an $18 registration, but we'll pay the registration and coordinate transportation up there if anyone's interested. So just let us know. We'll send you out an email later today with the details on that.
It's a really, really good opportunity.
You do you have the date of that?
I'm sorry, Friday, June 29th, so it's a week from this Friday. And it will be from noon to 2.
Okay.
That's all I had.
That's it. Okay. Future meeting agenda and announcements. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is tentatively scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. on Monday, July 16th, 2018 in Council Chambers, South Meeting Room of McNeese Convention Center at 501 Rio Concho Drive. Adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. I think we should table the adjournment.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, none.